You are listening to The Pilgrim on the 405 with Will Christ. Join him as he and his guests discover how businesses thrive in California.
Well, welcome to The Pilgrim on the 405 on this beautiful day here in California. We're going to have a great conversation today with a woman who knows lots about entrepreneurial growth. Catherine Nomura is the president and co-founder of a company called Kountable, and she's going to tell us about how this is helping entrepreneurial companies around the world get into the logistics chain that otherwise they might be locked out of. So welcome, Catherine.
Thank you, Will. Nice to be here.
So tell us about what you have been doing in the past 6 months with Kountable.
Well, so I might have to go back a little further for it to make sense. So Kountable is a startup that started in the Bay Area, but really we started working, our first market that we worked in was Rwanda. It was actually East Africa. And we support entrepreneurs. We started off supporting them. Initially, the problem that we discovered that the small entrepreneurs we were working with was sort of akin to trade finance. And they were trying to, these were entrepreneurs who were trying to import goods into East Africa and running into a classic problem, which we quickly realized is quite universal and global and happens even here in California, which is you win a contract with a very good customer. You need to buy goods in order to deliver on that contract. There may be more than just delivering the goods. There may be installation or other kinds of service involved. But in order to fulfill that contract, you need to buy some goods. And so you need to pay a supplier on one side, but you're not going to get paid by your customer until you deliver on the other end. And it's that period of time, which can often be, quite a short period of time. Sometimes it's maybe even only 45 days. But that can be a real challenge for a lot of small businesses, especially when they're trying to grow quickly. So there's, if you're trying to grow really quickly, you may be able to do it at first using, whatever lines of credit your bank will give you, using your own collateral, but that quickly becomes, a limiter. And then eventually it just, if you're growing quickly, you want to get contracts that are bigger than what your ability is to take care of that financial gap yourself. And so this is something that we learned very quickly as universal, but in the process of how we came to solve that problem, which is actually partnering with these entrepreneurs, we created a technology platform that allows us to connect these businesses and help them become digitally native in a way that is incredibly simple, works really in line with the way that they do business. So there's no setup, there's none of this kind of professional services kind of consulting that you normally need to do to get software platforms to work for your company. It's just built to actually make it work. And it takes the data that they generate in the everyday course of doing business and turns it into business intelligence and into data that they can use actually to win more contracts, to work with finance partners, all kinds of other things that they can do by having this data footprint that's been validated, that's auditable. And the value of that process, doing that process on a platform and being a part of a network, because that has become what we built Kountable around. So it started with this small problem and turned into a much bigger value proposition.
So in a sense, you're helping people qualify for credit lines.
No, we actually have a way of bringing process and governance into the transaction and partnering with them such that we can actually have, the funder of the majority of trades that we did in Africa was actually an LA-based hedge fund. You can believe that. Funding small-ish transactions, a large transaction on our platform would be $2 million. The average is about 150,000 US. So if you can imagine a US hedge fund funding $150,000 transaction for an African entrepreneur in Rwanda, that requires a very different way of doing things. So it's not quite as simple as although sometimes they do, through the process of working with us, qualify for more conventional finance.
What I was suggesting was that one of the things that seems to me that you're doing is helping a small entrepreneurial company generate the kind of data that's necessary for whether it's a credit line or a hedge fund in a large commitment of capital.
Yeah.
But without that data, nobody would look at them.
That's right. And how we do that at the beginning, I mean, this is one of those chicken egg problems where the first ones are always the hardest. How do you prove that you can do what you can do? And, you need the money to prove it. On our platform, we actually run the money. So when you do a trade on our platform, Kountable Capital Solutions will receive the funding, and we have a digital treasury cloud so that the entrepreneur can see the money. But we work together with the project plan for the project, and Countable's digital treasury function pays every vendor along the way, starting with the supplier usually, and that helps to reduce risk significantly too. But then all that data is there as well, and so that makes it possible for different kinds of funders to participate than would be able to, just on the basis of the data being available. So there's also a process part of this that makes different things possible.
I think you shared with me a story of an entrepreneur in Rwanda, mm-hmm. and that he had won a sizable contract for pumps for the port. Was that right? Something that we had made up as a possible story.
I think it was a possible story because we were talking about a contact you had who was in the pumps business. We have done projects involving pumps, but usually I tell stories mostly that involve either IT equipment or medical equipment.
Well, tell us a story about somebody who has a contract to supply IT equipment. They have no way of buying the IT equipment because they don't have the capital.
Sure. Yeah. So I'll tell you a story that, and actually anybody who's listening can go and see the video for this on YouTube, where you can actually hear this entrepreneur talking about his story, standing in the school for girls where he built a computer lab, which is up pretty much 24/7. It has very, very little downtime because he knew exactly what type of equipment they would need. This is a school that's in rural Rwanda. The environment's very dusty. They have a lot of power issues, so it needs to have battery backup. And of course, they're kids, so it needs to be protected against viruses and all those kinds of things too, because they're just going to use the computers the way they do. But they need them to be up because it's a very important part of their curriculum to be able to connect to the outside world through these computers. And so, a typical scenario for him in building that type of lab before Kountable would be he would actually have to get on a plane and fly to another country, say Dubai, and go to the equivalent of a Best Buy almost, go somewhere, buy all the things retail, bring them to the airport, try to get them on the plane, make sure everything actually gets on the plane, and then be at the airport and make sure it all comes off, and then, bring it through customs and do everything himself. That was, that was Rwanda at the time. They didn't have, if you don't have, distributors in your country that are providing the specific types of products you need, you have to find another way to get them.
Didn't have Fry's Electronics down the street.
Right, exactly. My friends were, why don't they just order them on Amazon? Work in East Africa. And then the expertise that a lot of these entrepreneurs have, not only, and I mean, I think this is true in California in different ways, is that some of the reasons why you sometimes want a smaller business to do this is they have domain expertise. It's very specific to the application that you're looking at. And so they will know how to build something that really works for you, and you'll get great service and aftercare service and maintenance and upgrades and that sort of thing from someone who has that knowledge. But the flip side of the smaller businesses, they have to get the suppliers to work with them that they want, and the orders tend to be smaller, so that's harder. And then there are all the issues around bringing goods in and logistics, the cost of logistics when you're only making smaller orders. A lot of the African entrepreneurs we were working for almost, paying almost retail. They would be paying quite a bit more than, what you would expect a large company bringing in large shipments to pay. And that all ends up going into the cost of these goods. And when you're talking about building something in a school, you don't want the budget to be super inflated. The same thing is true with medical supplies. They become much more expensive. And so you get obviously less impact for the dollars being spent if you have these costs. And then comes in the capital issue that we were talking about, the cost of capital, if they can get it. And banks would typically say no to this type of activity. And, it makes sense if you're a bank. The amount of underwriting required is just as much as, say here you think about, something like a mortgage where you're paying off over decades. And so there's a lot of interest involved there. There's no less underwriting involved. In fact, with entrepreneurial businesses, there's it's often quite difficult to get. There's no credit ratings, or the entrepreneurial behavior that's correlated with being a good entrepreneur is not necessarily good credit behavior, if that makes sense. And that's
right.
You're using money smartly. You're not using it to pay bills in the order that they come in. And that's, and so what we focus on is execution ability and the quality of the transaction itself. Is there a high quality payer? Is the entrepreneur, the business really qualified to provide this? Is the supplier good and reliable? We vet all the parties and make sure that the transaction looks very executable, and we remove any obvious execution risk through the way that it's set up. And we work with the entrepreneurs on this. And when they work with us, they actually learn things as well, because quite often entrepreneurs in these situations, and this we see this all the time here too. If you're always hustling and scrambling to try to figure out how to put together a deal because the systems really aren't built for you, you're never going to think about optimizing, because It's just about what can I get to work. And so they don't have the luxury of that.
How do I make payroll next week?
Right, exactly. So when you take that off the table and we look at how you optimize it, what we're effectively doing is giving them enterprise level pricing on all the components, including sometimes, even we can even get them terms on the goods, which really obviously affects the cost of funding the deal. But then even just on the logistics parts, because if Kountable is involved, we have logistics partners and they're working with everybody on the platform. So it's like a GPO kind of advantage that you get, a group purchasing order kind of
GPO?
A group purchasing organization. So essentially it's the power in the numbers of all the entrepreneurs on the platform. Mm-hmm. And our leverage and ability to work at, and also because we have data partners, all these different types of partners, mm-hmm. How to work with us, and that this is good business to have. And more than like 50% of the goods, there's so much of the world's commerce, a trade at the business to business level is done. It involves small businesses like this. So it's kind of shocking in a way that there aren't better systems created to support them. But part of it is they're so good at being resourceful that, they manage to get around it. And then it's much more economical or easier to build for enterprise.
Well, yes. At the same time, 50% of those businesses get started fail.
Yes, that's true. Yeah.
And while we can look at those who have succeeded and say, well, look how creative, how innovative, and how their persistence was there, all of these conversations. But the reality is that 50% could be increased so that there's more success by creating systems where, my goodness, a hedge fund is willing to fund not one, but a sequence of small logistical projects.
Yes. And in fact, it becomes more attractive for them to do so over time. I mean, we can actually attract capital from markets like that to this kind of trade, which, as I say, it's a huge portion of global trade, actually. Yeah. The fact that these types of markets are not engaged and don't have a way to engage is part of what keeps it small.
What you're really doing is reducing the friction on it so that money flows easier and the goods flow easier. The needs are being met by local people, which is a huge difference to my way of thinking.
Yes, you're absolutely right. And it's something which we've discovered is highly desirable in the U.S. right now as well.
Oh, so tell me about that.
So there are many U.S., well, you can start with corporations who really are committed to local content, to supplier diversity, and using local suppliers to support, say, retail outlets, both building facilities and then also supplying them. But it's very challenging for a large corporation, to manage a large, cadre of small businesses, and there hasn't been a platform to do that on until now, and that's what Kountable has built, this ability to sort of translate and to aggregate the activity, the very sort of messy, small, lots of different transactions, not digital, all that activity of all these small businesses, to turn it into data and into processes that can then be digestible by a large corporation that needs to make decisions based on, higher level view of what's going on.
Digestible, which creates credibility.
Yeah, credibility and also real-time ability to see what's going on. So there's a lot of visibility. There was this period of sort of data darkness when a small business takes over. It's like we talk about it in terms of our advocacy. It's like 2 different transactions on maybe SAP or something like that on these enterprise resource planning systems. There's when the big manufacturer ships the goods over, they hit the port, and then it's dark until the government agency or whoever buys it on the other end, and they have it in their system. But what happens in the middle has been completely.
And for the entrepreneur, it's don't bother me with that. I'm busy getting the goods to the place they need to be. So don't bother me with having to register anything or track it.
Yeah. Through our system, we get end-to-end transparency, which then allows you to really start doing some interesting things with optimization. And I talk about optimization because I know, with your EOS background, that's going to be something that you're interested in. And I'm sure that your listeners.
Well, that's right. But so help me to understand, how do we get to the small businesses? And they can certainly be majority culture businesses, or they can be minority business. But it's really addressing those. Not so much as a sale. Yeah. Right? I mean, a doctor doesn't pick up the phone and say, do you have cancer? Because I got a cure for it. Right? And you're not trying to buy that cure. You're really looking to participate in that. So how do we get to those small businesses and help them to see this is not trying to get you to do something that's not in your best interest, but here's an opportunity for you to participate in the larger business community?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And I think part of it is helping them to see, I think entrepreneurs do understand how they are disadvantaged. It's the water they swim in too.
That's why we go on the streets and protest, right?
Yeah. So the
system is against us. It's discriminating it. And it's not just Black. It's anybody who is a smaller entrepreneur.
Right. So part of it is then helping people first understand this is a solvable problem with data. And it wasn't 10 years ago. It is now. This is fair. So that's why this is so new and why it's happening now. With with our smartphones, with our computers, the connectivity that we have, and the sort of things that have gone before, there are lots of businesses, there's lots of platforms out there that we're all quite familiar with now. Like you can get an Uber, the Uber driver has a platform now to be able to sell their time driving their own car. I mean, that's an example. But so building on everything that's been created so far, we are now at a stage where we are able to create a platform that is simple enough for these businesses to use that they can come on. It's like, it takes no effort to try it. Basically, you can actually do it as a free trial right now even the cost of doing this now has been lowered down to where it makes sense to do it. And that would not have been true without technology.
Yes. And that makes it financially viable. What comes to my mind is a small company who buys a phone system that acts like they are a large company.
Yes.
And that's a model that fits Kountable, right? You have a model for a small business to participate in a marketplace that before you only could be participating in if you were a large major corporation.
That's right. And so what we've done is, we sometimes, I like to think about it as creating a relay race. If you look at the overall activity that we're trying to promote and where the small business fits in, they're a runner in a relay race, a really, really important one that hasn't been supported. So if you have a great team and everybody's great except this one person that has no running shoes, you're not going to win the race. And that's sort of what it's like, and they're scrambling around trying to do whatever they can to get it done. And, and so they maybe, they get a small portion of the business that they could. We're giving them the tools that they need to be as well-resourced as any enterprise partner. And yet doing it in a way that acknowledges the strengths that those small businesses bring. So we don't want them to turn into a big business in this. I mean, we want them to grow, obviously. But we also know that large businesses have lots of departments and things like that. And that's why they have these large systems, because they need that, because they have this bureaucracy that That's what those things are designed for. What we need is something that has the functionality, but that's designed for the way an entrepreneur works, which is nimble, right? You can do it on your smart. You have a team that may change over time depending on the project. You may have different people working on different individual projects. So that's very easy. You can have all your different team members on the platform, and you can assign them to different things and give them permission to look at different things. And you basically just sign up and you get started. You don't have to hire some consulting firm to come and design this for you, which has been a huge barrier to entry. I mean, we have felt that. When I look at our technology stack and I think of how much we spent on, non-starters, where we thought we needed something and then we got into it and it's like, this isn't really going to work. And we've already spent tens of thousands of dollars, and it's very discouraging. It's also not it's not, I talk unique ability as something from my strategic coach days, but we have these small companies have their unique abilities. There are things that they're very, very good at, and it's solving problems, right? They shouldn't be building technology solutions.
That's right. That's exactly right. So we're going to take a break here, and we're here from one of our technology partners who's sponsoring our show, and be right back. And then I want to pursue with you what in EOS we call a marketing strategy for Kountable.
Traction Tools is the EOS software for visual collaborative problem solvers like you, built to manage each key component of your business, including vision and traction, data, people, meetings, and even process. The new digital whiteboard helps you illustrate, communicate, and work together throughout the decision-making process, and our new document drive makes file sharing even easier. So, if you want to save time and reduce repetitive tasks with easy automations, you really should take a look at Traction Tools and their EOS software. Sign up for a 30-day free trial at mytractiontools.com. That's mytractiontools.com. And now back to our show.
So when we talk to entrepreneurial companies about their marketing strategy, and you'd be an entrepreneurial company, right?
Yes, we are.
All right. So the question that I would ask is, number one, who is the list? Who are your ideal customers? Describe for me what that list is.
Sure. So we're a platform. So we have there's a bit of an ecosystem. So in the center is the SMEs that we've talked about. And, our ideal customer there is a business that is growing and wants to, and works in an industry where they are going after contracts with usually larger customers. May not be enterprise level, but it's often government, or sometimes it's enterprise, sometimes it's NGOs even. Particularly in Africa, we work with the UN and other the WHO and those sorts of institutions as well. So they have large customers. They win contracts, and they need execution support to grow at the level that they would like to. And that may include sourcing, it may include funding, it may include just the trade management and execution. All of those things support them in their growth.
So when you say execution, you're talking about logistics, right? You're not talking about coming in and plugging in computers.
No, it could. So it could be logistics, but it's around building the transaction itself and running the transaction. So they have their domain expertise and their sales capability. Those things, they're good at winning contracts, and they're good at actually the specifics of delivering in their industry. The challenges that they generally have are around getting the goods to be able to do that effectively. And this getting the goods is actually a whole other area. It's really global trade and finance, and
right.
It's outside of the the true domain expertise. But anyone who's been successful has some ability there, but it's never going to be the thing that they should be focusing on the most.
That's not their unique ability.
That's right.
That's not their unique ability. And so what they're missing on their team is a partner whose unique ability is solving the problem of financing, generating the credibility for that we will, that we will get the goods to the place that is purchasing them.
Yes.
There's credibility there, that there's a system for making that happen. And I mean, if I were building a company that required that logistical need or that financing need, I would have to have somebody on my team whose unique ability was getting financing for small companies. I would have to have somebody on my team whose unique ability was getting the goods from the right place to the right place.
That's right.
And if I'm an entrepreneur and I'm spending all of my time selling and then connecting things up, installing things at the end, I may not have the margin for the time, the resources, or the money to have those two people, but you're providing that for them.
That's right. And I would say that even if you could hire them yourself, this is like, think about what it's like to hire a PR firm. You're much better off spending the money on a PR firm that does this for a whole bunch of different businesses and knows all the right people.
Absolutely. I'm with you. But what I'm saying is that is recognizing that I don't have to do that myself as the entrepreneur.
That's right. This is something you can delegate, and you can delegate it to a team that does it all day, every day, and is connected in the best ways to a network that has capabilities that no individual company, even large companies, don't have, because they understand what the needs are of these small businesses, and they're building tools just to satisfy those needs that aren't available.
Right. So how do we talk to those folks? How do we let them know? Because what I see, I mean, same thing when I'm selling EOS. I'm never selling EOS, but when I'm out talking about EOS, what I'm looking at is, how do I find a way to improve businesses?
Yeah.
How do I do that? Because I'm not trying to get them to buy something that they don't want to buy. I'm trying to give them the opportunity to get what they want.
Yeah.
And so how are you doing that at Kountable?
So this is where I need to continue on to talk about the rest of the platform a little bit, because there are other pieces that are part of that puzzle. And also on our platform are the buyers, who are their customers, and the suppliers who provide the goods, and the logistics providers, and the finance providers. So Countable's just in the middle, helping all these parties to work together effectively and giving each of them the data and the security, managing risk, so that they can work effectively. So those other partners, and particularly, so it may be, and we also have some institutional partners who are really their trade facilitation organizations that want to help this whole process work better. This could be government, they could be NGOs, but all of those organizations know groups of entrepreneurs. They have a constituency, they have a membership, they have the procurement departments of these large organizations. The corporations have small business suppliers, have a list, and they want them to do better. And this is where, we can work with them to work with their suppliers and get them into a program. And then inside of a program, we can do even more for them, because quite often then we can bring in, different things that we couldn't do if it was a bunch of one-off different transactions, and get, even greater efficiency. There's clarity around, who the parties are. If the buyer is the same, if they're all connected to the same buyer, that reduces risk, for instance, for funding, or they may have access to funding. If they're paying for this stuff, they might want to use their own financing, but run it through our platform to make sure that they know exactly where the money is and how that's all being handled, and that all of the suppliers who are working with those resources are supported fully through Countable's network. Mm-hmm. So that's one of the main, particularly, that's happening actually all over the world. We're working with large, both suppliers with their distributor networks and with buyers on their supplier network.
So you are helping them get that job done. I'm wondering, those small companies, what's the typical range of employees in those companies? Are they startups? Or are they?
They tend not to be startups. It could be a startup. We would probably start with small transactions with a startup, but generally speaking, they're fairly well established. But it depends on the industry, and it could be 4 or 5 people, or it could be that they have a team of 100 because they're installing and that sort of thing.
For EOS, EOSers pick up at 10 to 250 employees.
Yeah, I would say that's
a sweet spot. And now those companies have issues around logistics and funding and running the transaction, sourcing. I'm just wondering how many of those companies have an organization that is helping them get what they want.
I think a lot of them are working in a sort of I would say the larger, more established ones maybe have more regular processes, but quite a number of the smaller ones, particularly what we've seen in East Africa, is that they're hustling a lot. So it's a one-off. Each transaction is a new thing. Like they're chasing contracts, they get it, and they figure each one out as they go, and that's a fairly typical scenario, which obviously doesn't leave a lot of room for the kind of what you're talking about, because each time, and in some cases, they may be hiring different people every time to do, we have to talk about FTEs versus who else they're hiring to get the work done. That depends a lot on the industry.
It's the Hollywood process, right?
It could be for some
of the projects. So let's get everybody together, and everybody knows we're going to be here as long as the movie goes, and then we're gone.
That's right. Yeah. So they for installation type things, we work industrial equipment a lot. That's just the way that type of business is done quite often. It may not be the ideal way. I've certainly, I've been involved with businesses where, and I've seen the success that can be had when you have, a more consistent approach to that sort of thing.
Right. You have processes that are consistent, right? Yeah. You begin to be a real business rather than a hopeful business.
But in some industries, that's the way a lot of the work is done. And some of these guys have been very successful doing things that way for years, particularly if you look at construction and that sort of thing.
Well, part of that is the entrepreneur thinks of himself in those startup days as his whole identity. If I'm not working 80 hours a week, I'm not maximizing my value, which is not true. It's not true. I mean, if you're very few people are working 80 hours in a company at the leadership level and working the majority of their time in their unique ability.
Absolutely. I mean, you need to be able to delegate to grow. It's absolutely essential. Obstacle that you have to get over is the need to be a rugged individualist and control and do everything. And, I, again, referring back to Strategic Coach and Dan Sullivan, it's the very first thing. And sometimes the hardest thing to let go of is that desire to be in control of everything.
Let go of the vine. Right.
Yeah, and it's the best thing for your team and obviously your own creativity and your ability to even just to think straight. Being able to kind of get away from it and let your team run with things is important, but you have to have a team you can trust to do that. And the flip side of that is you have to trust your team. So it's usually the leap of faith the entrepreneur has to make.
That's right. Yeah. So I'm just curious, about how EOS implementers could help those companies in a similar way to what you're doing, providing that absent runner in the relay race. I'm wondering how EOS implementers around the country, around the world, could contribute to helping those companies become, I don't know, what would you say, more solid, more real, more substantial, more stable, scalable?
Sure. Yeah. One of the things is, so this is I was describing this a little bit before, that if you go from just, trying to hustle and put together every contract and just get it done to inside of our process, this happens very quickly. I've seen this happen with every business that we've done repeat trades with. It very much changes your outlook because you don't have to worry about certain things anymore. You can go after much bigger contracts. And then on our platform, what happens is all of a sudden you have all this data, all this business intelligence about what you're doing, because you can see, so there's footprints, there's, sort of digital footprints, but there's all kinds of information that businesses obviously turn up as they're doing business, but most of it doesn't get captured and turned into structured data. When you work inside of Countable's platform, it just, in the course of doing what you do, all the documents you put in turn in structured data that you can see and you can use, and you see project plans, but you can also see, looking back, what was successful, what wasn't. You can start to make decisions and think about how you'd like to plan your growth in the future rather than just.
You have the data to do that. And what I'm suggesting is that there is an organizational shift to be able to make decisions based upon that.
And that's what I was going to say next, is that I think that that's where EOS can come in, because just because you have the data doesn't mean you know what to do with it.
Right.
And that's a very important, it's great to know that and to suddenly realize you can go after, much bigger contracts, but that may involve hiring more people. It can create more complexity unless you know how to manage it.
That's right. Because if you're used to hustling, and then all of a sudden you've solved this particular problem, if your world is, I just hustle, then you're really creating a lot of even more complexity. If you can simplify that and get clear on who's taking responsibility, and you have the right people in the right seats, and they're using their unique ability, which is why we want to put them in that seat, then now, in addition to the contribution you're making, I think there's a place where EOS implementers around the country can make an equal, powerful contribution to helping these businesses move forward. They're not all going to become giant mega corporations, but that's not the point. The point is to free up people so that they're actually using their unique ability, which is a joyful thing, and contributing to the welfare and well-being of people around them.
Absolutely. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And, and I know that, it's much nicer. I mean, sometimes in the moment, you don't necessarily experience this, but I think it is better for most people to have the challenges of growth and complexity rather than of scarcity. So it's like you suddenly have these challenges of abundance, the abundance of opportunity, and how to capture that versus the scarcity that makes you have to hustle that hard and be that, it's a big mindset shift to go from always being the person who can work around and try to make things work to all of a sudden having them all work. It's a little like the person.
Oh my gosh.
doesn't know what to do with themselves anymore.
That's right. I've had people come back from vacation and they come back in and they're looking for, where's the list of all the things that didn't get done that I need to do now? I don't see anything on my desk, because it was all taken care of. People made decisions, took responsibility, took initiative. And it's a mind about it. It's a mental shift for them. And sometimes it's a strong emotion. Oh my gosh, if we really do this well, then what am I, chopped liver? I mean, what is my role here?
Yeah, I mean, that's one response, and it can certainly happen. And then on the other side, you might have the person who immediately goes to, okay, I'm gonna move up market. I'm gonna go from being just the person who's doing the implementation to working with other people who will do similar implementations and just getting products for them or what there's different, but all of regardless of how you handle it, your organization, what you do, your role is going to change. And you want it, ideally to become more of your unique ability, more value at a higher level. And so it's like,
elevate. Yeah.
Right. What does the rest of your company look like to support that? This is the nature of Countable's platform, is it can happen very quickly. So that's why you need help. Right? It's not something most entrepreneurs will easily be able to figure out overnight. They can certainly do it. And we've had entrepreneurs transform their businesses massively and in very successful ways doing this. But it's always better, I think, if you have some help to think through doing.
We can explore that. We'll have to take some time and explore how this large array of EOS implementers around the country and really around the world can help those companies that want to get some help. So what would you like to tell our listeners? We have a minute or two left. What would you like to tell our listeners?
I would like to tell them that we are on the threshold of a massive transformation in the inclusiveness and effectiveness, the possibilities for inclusion for small business and their effectiveness in global supply chains. This is something that the world is sort of demanding based on what's happening. We've all experienced supply chains in different ways, I think, through the experiences of COVID and the pandemic and what that's done to our daily lives. And now much more aware we are that there is such a thing as supply chains. Here in the US, it's quite easy to just think you can go to the store and get anything or go on Amazon. But we all know that's not true now. I think the world is converging and technology is converging to elevate small businesses and allow them to play a much bigger role in doing this. And there's incredible advantages to local communities and having their local businesses be supported in this way. And, there's a lot of talk about supporting small business for economic growth, for recovery, to sort of build things back in a better way, and to support a lot of challenges where, there's a lot of ingenuity that comes out of these because they know exactly what really happens on the ground. To capture that, there's a huge change-making possibility there, as well as just, what can happen in business and the economic growth that can happen by supporting these small businesses. And technology is there now. I know with Kountable, and I know there are other partners and other businesses that we collaborate with, and others who cover different parts of the market that are allowing small businesses to have more capability than they've ever had.
Yeah.
The flip side of this for US implementer listeners is they are going to need help to understand how to take advantage of all of this new opportunity and really, reach a place where they're working in their unique ability if they're the entrepreneur, where they're building the strongest organization to support all of that growth and capability, and then delivering back what small businesses really have to offer all of us.
Right. That's wonderful, Catherine. I salute you on your journey to this transition, this pivotal point that COVID has brought us even greater awareness of how vulnerable we are, and also what the opportunities are that we have around the world. So thank you so much for being with us. And this is not our last conversation for sure.
Thank you. It's always enjoyable to talk to you, Will.
And for our listeners, this is just another example of how businesses thrive in California, and also how businesses that are thriving can help other businesses to thrive in California.
You've been listening to The Pilgrim on the 405 with Will Christ. To hear more of the programs in this podcast, go to www.willchrist.com.